Okay, let's just jump straight into this explainer. We're looking at a really fascinating piece of philosophy today by an author named Zhu Feng. And the whole idea here is taking something completely ordinary, a basic law of nature we see every single winter, and using it to explain, well, kind of the entire universe. We're talking everything from why you suddenly lose your temper, all the way up to the absolute highest levels of spiritual evolution. It's a wild ride. Right off the bat, we get this incredibly grounding thought from the author. He says, living in the northern part of Canada, there's a particular sensitivity to 0 degrees. And, it hits the nail on the head. It highlights how literally one tiny degree on a thermometer changes everything. You're standing there looking at a totally frozen, static blanket of snow, and then bam, a 1 degree shift, and suddenly you've got melting ice and flowing water. So, let's start with Section 1, the 0 degree turning point. Sui Feng points out that 0 degrees is this ultimate turning point. It's where matter completely changes its state. If you stay below 0, everything is just solid and static. The snow is stuck, it won't melt. But the second you cross that invisible threshold to above 0, everything transforms. It becomes liquid, it's dynamic, it flows. It's an absolute qualitative shift, all based on this one tiny invisible line. And to show the real-world stakes of this, the author shares this super relatable anecdote about a vegetable cold storage room. So if you keep that room safely above 0, say around 2 to 4 degrees Celsius, your vegetables are totally fine. But if you're in the middle of a brutal Canadian winter and that indoor room slips to exactly 0 degrees or below, those vegetables instantly freeze. And when they thaw out, they rot and are completely ruined. The huge takeaway here is that in the physical world, 0 degrees isn't just some random number about water freezing. It acts as a literal boundary line between life and death. Above 0 means life. Below 0 means death. It's really that stark. Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, psychological critical points. To explain this, Schreffing borrows a term straight out of physics, the critical point. It's defined as the exact threshold where a qualitative change occurs in a substance. But here is the fascinating part. He argues that our minds, our human emotions, actually operate on the exact same principles as water and ice. Every single one of us has a psychological critical point. Think about how this plays out in real life. Step 1, you're taking some criticism, maybe some insults. Step 2, that mental pressure just builds and builds until it hits your personal threshold. And step 3, once you cross that critical point, boom, an explosion of anger or worse. It's exactly like water instantly freezing into solid ice. Human tolerance has a hard limit. You push someone past their mental critical point, and their behavior just entirely, drastically flips. But we aren't just talking about a sudden burst of anger here. The author argues that severe psychological states, like deep depression, are basically the result of a mind dropping below its own internal 0 degree mark. When the pressure exceeds the threshold of what you can mentally carry, you face a critical phase shift. Essentially, your mind freezes over. Let's keep expanding this. Section 3, the evolution of consciousness. Now we're looking at the grand scale of spiritual evolution. According to the source text, crossing these massive, invisible thresholds dictates the evolution of all life. Phase 1 is animal consciousness. But if that consciousness crosses a specific 0 degree critical point, it levels up into phase 2, human consciousness. And it doesn't stop there. If a human crosses their next major critical point, they enter phase 3, which the author describes as an immortal or Buddha consciousness. Now, this brings up a really great question from the text. I mean, anyone who's ever tried to better themselves has probably wondered this. Why do people spend decades on spiritual growth, meditation, self-improvement, and yet feel like they are getting absolutely nowhere? Why do they just give up halfway? Well, the author presents this harsh but incredibly logical reality. It's because they haven't crossed the 0 degree line. You can put in a massive amount of effort, but if your growth stays below that critical point, absolutely no qualitative change happens. The text literally says that even after 10,000 years of practice below the threshold, you remain exactly who you were. You're essentially just ice at -5 degrees. Sure, you might be warming up a little, but until you hit 1 degree above 0, you aren't water. You haven't actually transformed. Okay, moving to Section 4, when the fruit ripens. To make this abstract spiritual concept feel a bit more tangible, the author uses this beautiful metaphor of ripening fruit. It shows that patience is absolutely key here. Think about a growing piece of fruit. As long as it's still developing, the stem is firmly attached to the branch, right? It hasn't crossed the threshold. But a fully ripe fruit, that stem just falls away completely naturally. The stem of your old self simply won't drop until that critical 0-degree growth point is actually reached. Finally, let's scale this all the way up. Section 5, the pivot of all change. What is truly remarkable about this text is how impartially it approaches spiritual destinations. It completely redefines them. It doesn't describe heaven or hell as physical places up in the clouds or deep underground. Instead, they are permanent states on a cosmological thermometer. Hell is defined simply as perpetually hovering below the 0-degree mark, a constant state of freezing and death. Conversely, heaven, or paradise, is perpetually living above the 0-degree mark. It's a constant, eternal state of flowing life. And this leads right into the ultimate conclusion of Swifing's philosophy. The explainer wraps up this massive cosmological argument by defining the concept of the greatest creator, but not as a human-like figure in the sky. Instead, the creator is defined precisely as that 0-degree critical point itself. It is the origin of all movement, the universal pivot of change. It's the unavoidable threshold that all fundamental changes in life absolutely must pass through. You quite literally cannot change your state of being without passing through 0. So, as we wrap up this incredible breakdown of the 0-degree philosophy, I really want to leave you with a question to chew on. Take a look at your own habits, your mindset, your long-term goals. What is the 0-degree critical point you're trying to cross in your own life right now? Because remember, you might be just one single degree away from a complete transformation. Keep pushing toward that threshold. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.